And joining us in studio, Botsang Moilwa, political analyst. Etienne Retief is chairperson of the National Tax and SARS Stakeholders Committee at SAIPA. And we've got Nkonko, or rather Nora Okwonko, legal expert, and Sizo Pila Mkize, ANC Youth League NEC member. Good evening to you, and thanks so much for joining us. I mean, maybe let's just start with Mr. Retief, if you with us, to explain the difference between tax avoidance and tax evasion. Mr. Retief, are you there?
Yes. The first step is when we talk about tax evasion and tax avoidance, often it's more academic because tax avoidance is regarded as the legal way to avoid taxes using schemes, legal loopholes, secrecy jurisdictions, and perhaps even playing different jurisdictions against each other, where tax evasion is more towards the illegal means of trying to avoid taxes, and that often comes with failure of disclosure or hiding those funds altogether.
And we break away from normal programming to bring you news just in. The South African Revenue Services says it is aware of the data leaks dubbed the Paradise Papers. It says they are working closely with the Treasury and partners in this regard, as was done with the Panama Papers, and they add that the information is subjected to SARS standard of compliance processes. So a response from the Revenue Services with regards to them being implicated in the alleged illicit cash flow that has robbed many governments across the country. We're just trying to define from a legal point of view whether these particular leaks can be classified as illegal activity. Mr. Retief, if you are still with us. So continue, just from this Paradise Papers, is it your view then that there was illegality or some form of corruption happening with these companies, at least the local ones, seeking tax havens?
Well, I think, first of all, we need to understand that not all companies could be said that they're doing illegal or corrupt activities purely because they're using offshore structures. If you're trading internationally, there is a legitimate reason why you'd want to have your structures diversified so that it can account for your trading. And again, the information we have is limited, so it's quite speculative. I think that there's definitely opportunities here where transfer pricing and base erosion and profit shifting type arrangements has taken place, and leaks like this help very much so because it exposes the what normally would have been hidden away under secrecy provisions or complexity. But I would be hesitant to qualify anything as being illegal at this point without having the opportunity of understanding the full nature of the transaction.
And Mr. Okwonko, in your view, is this why capital or generally established businesses is difficult to hold them accountable because of the complexity and the creative ways of how books are balanced, etc.?
Well, it's a balance of both, but the primary purpose of his position or most of these leaks is to currently show the deficiency in systems aiding companies or big companies from not being compliant with statutory institutions such as making payment of available tax as a when due. Therefore, if you look at the Panama leaks, what was the after effect of the leaks up until now? I don't think there was much that came out of it. So what happens primarily is that investigative journalists are saying that enough is enough of these bigger institutions bulldozing or avoiding the system by costing countries the trading a lot of revenues in what money they would have used in. I hope at this time, like he made mention, I hope at this point in time that South African government through SARS or Treasury will look critically to find out the merits of these accusations and then hold the companies liable. Because it's more or less like an indictment against corporations and individuals that appear to be above board. So taking those factors into consideration, and these proper channels, we'll then bring them to face questions in line with what they're saying. Until it's tested, we don't know which way forward.
And I mean, part of the Paradise Papers also implicate Glencore, a multinational conglomerate in various interests, largest commodity trader in the world, and having negotiated a deal through a shady Egyptian leader who then allowed them or enabled them to buy a mine in the DRC at the fraction of that mine using a loan that was guaranteed by Appleby in part of the negotiations. For me, I think it's what we've always suspected, that Africa is being raided and looted at the expense of its people, and seemingly our hands are tied. What's on your view?
Well, good evening, Indian fellow panelists as well as ANN7 viewers. You know, what's said in this whole saga and view is that these companies, they've studied and they know the laws of the countries that they are operating from. For example, South Africa in this case. They use South Africa as a springboard to loot the continent and to enter into illegal financial transactions all over the world, and therefore avoiding paying taxes. I've heard Mr. Retief earlier on talking about the difference between tax avoidance and tax evasion, and saying tax evasion is more being a legal form of evasion. There's nothing legal, he said legal, in avoiding to pay tax, you know, using the gray areas in the legal system or into the transactions that you are doing and taking advantage of gray areas of the systems is actually an illegal and unjust conduct that you are entering into. But now the difference is, and I like what Mr. Okongo was saying, to say the difficulty is South African Revenue Services in this sense and Treasury, they should go back and review the punitive measures that we have as a country in penalizing companies that are conducting themselves the way Glencore, Standard Bank again is in the picture, Investec as well as Shanduka, sadly so. They should go and look at punitive measures. You will find that a company is doing this tax evasion because they know that the penalties that the countries are imposing on them are a fraction, you know, a slap on the wrist compared to the billions or trillions of dollars that they are making, and then they will be fined 250,000 rands in South Africa and they get away with it. And that's where the problem is.
Yeah, and I mean, if there's no reform in policy, Sizopila, and with the ANC government still having majority control, I guess, is that this will continue. We talk about a period between 2002 and 2012 of over $1 trillion in revenue or cash that South Africa potentially has lost. And we can't even trace or follow the paper trail in holding people accountable. What is your view?
Well, our view is that when we speak about the radical economic transformation, we speak about it referring to things like this, where big companies come and loot South Africa and Africa. And in this worst case scenario, you see that the tax has been avoided, and you have there's so many dodgy things that are happening with this company. Some of them are having their offices in very secrecy places, and you ask yourself the reasons behind that. You ask yourself the reasons behind making so much money in South Africa and failing to equally comply with SARS. I think that it is about high time, maybe, as the ANC government and as South Africans, to stand and try to transform the economy and have our own companies, because most of these companies, some of them are not even from South Africa, but they are looting and making so many transactions, so many big businesses in South Africa. We need to make sure that we uplift our own companies and make sure that the people that benefit from South Africa, the people that will respect the laws of South Africa and will be able to comply with SARS.
And I agree with you. Mr. Retief, just in terms of the financial systems or agencies like the revenue services, the Reserve Bank, if that is not the final line of defense of ensuring that there isn't any illicit cash flows or even avoidance of recovering revenue that is due to the state, what can be done then to hold these companies accountable or even have more scrutiny and oversight?
Well, I think the first thing just to note in that is that we do have strong provisions already in things like foreign-controlled companies, transfer pricing. We've even recently started the multilateral sharing of information between jurisdictions. These things are very important because for any revenue authority to take action, it needs information. So I think the level of information, other than just from leaks, but coming also from things like information sharing and the country-by-country reporting that also comes in later this year, I think these things will make it a lot more difficult for multinationals to just hide it and perhaps just to hide behind transfer pricing and other means to deal with it. But I think the biggest problem of all, it's not just because these transactions are complex and they deal with across multiple countries, and for that we need all those countries to essentially want to close down these kind of structures. And as long as the countries are happy to play pawn to for other companies to use their jurisdiction for secrecy provisions or to evade certain taxes, then it will still remain complex. And unfortunately, our revenue authorities will have to be very vigilant in this regard.
And Mr. Okonkwo also speaks about just sterilizing the leadership of in Africa, primarily the DRC being implicated, Joseph Kabila, and having had a hand in allowing Glencore to buy a mine at a fraction thereof, and another case in Zambia involving Illovo Sugar, where their tax rate was calculated at 0.5%, while the corporate official rate was 35%. Your view in terms of how, at that level, things have gone awry and continue to do so?
The point of discovering of such inadequacies is looking at what is Paradise Papers all about. It's about tax evasion, mostly, because of complexity laws, which helps for them to hemorrhage these funds. Now, what would be the way forward in this instance? Paradise Paper is talking about offshore illicit tax evasion. How then, for me, I want to concentrate on a region that concerns me primarily because I'm domiciled here. How then do we stop this max erosion of taxation by these companies that cost us billions? 2 years ago, Thabo Mbeki, former president, oversaw a panel. I was making a disclosure that actually the illicit tax evasion in terms of flow is about 1 trillion, which amounts to $50 billion cost to what? African nations, such as SA. What is the implication? It deepens inequality amongst the states and creates a stronger section of the rich gets richer. What SARS needs to do is a recommendation for those that actually work at the base of erosion and strengthening and deepening the transfer of pricing issue, because that is the area they permit to commit all these atrocities. If we can get it right, we are saying other African nations can sleep, but South Africa should stand up to protect their own. It's a very simple thing. It's not about making laws, because these people understand the complexities of these laws and then penetrate the laws. That's why these papers are leaked and saying that they are doing what? Cooking the books. They call it artificial or whatever. But the find is that it takes them to set up parameters or devices to detect this. And once they detect, they slam with a ban. It's not all about hitting foreigners and stamping their permits with a red flag. We don't want to. These are serious things that impede positive economic development and is a fundamental go against negativity of the RET, which is radical economic transformation.
And exactly, and as Sizopila was saying, that it really denies future generations, prospects in how you can develop. But even as complex as it is, Mr. Okonkwo, I'd like to believe that there is something that can be done. Is it political will that would enable us to apply the punitive measures, as you were saying?
I disagree with him when he says it's not the complexity of the land changing the laws. I still say, and I insist on, drastic punitive measures and simplifying the rules or the laws that are available so that this company should not be able to beat the system. If the system and the laws are so complex as he is explaining, then let's simplify them and make it difficult for these companies to can conduct themselves in the manner they are conducting themselves. But also when it comes to punitive measures, he used an example of having an illegal immigrant in South Africa, or somebody who comes to this country and does not conduct himself in a manner that is described by the immigration laws. What do? Is they put you on a blacklist and you'll be blocked to can come to South Africa again. We should do the same with these companies. Yeah. Apply rules and regulations whereby we will say Standard Bank or Glencore or even Shanduka, that is partially owned by the Deputy President of this country, to say you have conducted yourself outside the parameters of the revenue services of the country, outside the parameters of making trade with foreign companies, and therefore will not allow you anymore to can conduct business in this country because of, and it can be punitive measure based on time frames. It can be permanent depending on the atrocities that these companies have committed. We cannot just sit back and say because our laws are complex and therefore we cannot punish them. But what is even more worrying and what is making it easy for these companies is that you will find that politicians and political office bearers are involved in these processes. The case of the DRC with President Kabila being mentioned, the case of Zambia, and the case of Ethiopia. We may find that South African political office bearers are involved into these processes as well, aiding the system, aiding these companies. And if we do not bring executives of these companies to book, this country has never sat down and jailed a politician who has committed corruption.
Is it audit lifestyles, or is that the information is confidential and you don't have access to it? We do have instruments like the Financial Intelligence Center, there's the Reserve Bank, and all sorts of other policies that prevent corrupt activity, especially in illicit flows. What then needs to happen in a political space to clean up those that are contaminated or that are not advancing the agenda the country is going?
For over the years in South Africa, we have been complaining about corruption. And most corruption is done by the people that are elected to actually take the country forward and to take the country from its imbalances of the past. But now, when you have political people and political leaders mentioned in such leaks and in such documents, you find yourself asking that many people have been held accountable. We need to. I'm glad that SARS is aware of the Paradise leaks. It means that SARS and finance need to take steps forward, and they need, just like my colleague here is saying, that these people need to be brought to book. And if there are politicians that are involved in this saga, themselves need to be made sure that they are brought to book. If means be, they must be jailed for corruption, and they must be jailed for avoiding tax, because for over the years, many people in South Africa, by the way, have been held accountable. They've been in papers. Political leaders have been in papers on tax avoidance and not being able to comply with SARS. Now, we need to do the same, and maybe we need to strengthen the hand in dealing with these companies and anyone that might be involved in the shenanigans of these companies.
Yeah, and Mr. Retief, rather, in looking at the liability of the partners that may form part of the consortium or whatever transaction, is it the financier's business to want to know who else might be implicated or who might not be above board, that they ought to know, in this case Standard Bank with the financing of the Zambian transaction?
Well, I would hate to point fingers without knowing all the facts. What I would expect to happen is, when information like this comes to light, is that the Reserve Bank would now go back to the basis of the application for approval that was made and have a look at whether there was a proper disclosure of the necessary facts. And if it's found that, let's say, Standard Bank has contravened exchange control requirements, considering that they are authorized dealers, then action should be taken against them. But like any process, it needs a proper investigation before we can punish or point fingers, because for all intents and purposes, they might very well have acted correctly and above board, and there might be other parties or factors that was not caught in the system. And if our system is found not to be sufficient enough to test these transactions before the outflow of funds, then I would take it back to the point of saying, well, is our system strong enough for the approval and for testing it in order to ensure that these types of transactions are properly understood before approval is granted?
Mr. Okonkwo, let's just bring it back in. You were saying that the deficit in proper processes or the weakness and loopholes is what creates this an environment for the capitalists to continue looting. What is there any benchmark or even an example of how other countries deal with issues of tax avoidance allegations or tax fraud?
Of course. If you go to United States, for example, they have a very sound punitive process, just like they have instituted something they call the civil forfeiture right. What it simply means, if they find you in excess of $5,000, it doesn't care what is for, they just impound the money as drug or as drug-related or corrupt money, and put it aside and use it over the years to do other things. So you need to set a precedent. And that's why I always refer to American democratic style as the perfect model of democracy. Why do I say that? Nobody is above the law. Once you are found to be indicted in any serious offense, the law takes its effect. This was what happened during the FIFA saga about corruption. FBI entered and dealt with it decisively. We are not here to spare any. It's not about this. We want to save and preserve a legacy for what we have built on post-apartheid. We cannot continue to fund people, and those people do not have regard for you and call you all sorts of names. So let South African government come up with punitive workable system or laws that if we catch you here, we deal with you. Of course, that's what we are arguing now in court, in the Oscar Pistorius matter. Is 15 years and 6 years, which is best? Under which mitigating circumstances are we talking of? Are we talking of the application of the dolus eventualis? On what grounds are we saying that 6 years is not the right sentence to permit? Murder, if found guilty, is 15. Why 6? So these are things we need to take into. Listen, there's no golden cow. There's no sacred cow. What is good for the geese should be good for the gander. So if we get you in this thing, be it Shanduka, be it Glencore, be it Standard Bank, maximum full weight of the law will come in. And
but it's also, Mr. Okonkwo, sorry to break your word, in the neoliberalist approach that the country adopted in '94, in the sense that business interests will be insulated and will sort of go on a gradual transformation program that we sit with this. I mean, the likes of Glencore, internationally listed in all sorts of commodities, one of the largest for that matter, and the financing sector being such a close-knit, almost Bruderbond, if you want to call it that. What does that mean then for the future of young people like yourself in trying to, live in a society that is balanced, equal, and has opportunities?
You know, it is saddening to face such situation as the one we're discussing today as young people, because most of the people that are benefiting from the economy of South Africa are the people that benefited even during apartheid.
Yes.
They continue to benefit in democracy. Now you ask yourself that these years we've spent in democracy, what is it that we're doing? What is it that we're not doing right? What is it that we're doing incorrect? And we need to look at ourselves, more especially as the ruling party, to say, what is it? How do we cut these companies that are looting? Because some of the companies, you might find that they are involved in some of the political decisions that happen in South Africa. Now, you ask yourself that as as we are saying that we need to empower young people, we need to preserve South Africa for future generation, are we not going to see a time where these companies are going to say, because as it stands right now, it looks like they take shots in South Africa. Now, are we not going to have them saying that if you elect this leader, as we've had, and not this leader, then we're not going to invest in South Africa, for instance?
And we know that playing out in this political climate, but we'll leave it there with the voice of the young lioness, Sizophila Mkhize. Thank you so much for joining us. And Butang Mwilwa, political analyst, and we have Nora Okonkwo, legal expert. Thanks indeed. And the chairperson of the National Tax and SARS Stakeholders Committee, Mr. Etienne Retief, joining us via Skype. We'll take a quick ad break. Do stay with us. ANC Decides is up next with Mfundo Mabalani.